Inspiration. I'm willing to bet that word means something different to all of us. To me, inspiration is a mix of creativity and dedication. It's something that I use to drive myself forward, something that fuels my projects, and something that, makes waking up in the morning worth it. Those passions, those ideals, those dreams. To me, that is inspiration, and that always has been. But to you and everyone else out there, inspiration might be something completely different. But let's strip all that away for a second, and let's take out the individual human aspect of inspiration, and let's look at it as a concept. What is it? Why does it exist? And why does it live so much longer than we do? There are a lot of people in history who start out to do things but never finish them. Look at a lot of Masons, for example. A lot of massive projects were started in the real world that would never, ever be finished by their original creator. Look at the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, for example. It's this massive Titanic cathedral that started construction in the 1800s, and it's still being built to this day. Whoever came up with the idea for the cathedral, whoever drew the plans, is long dead, and yet the project lives on, the inspiration lives on. And at its heart, I think that's a very human thing. And I think no piece of fiction or media has done a better job at showing that untamable curiosity, that restless desire that human beings possess, than Orb on the movements of the Earth. Now, this show is truly remarkable. It's one of a kind and something that I think everybody should experience before they die. So for your own sake, if you haven't seen this show, get off this video and go watch the damn anime. 3, 2, 1. Okay, before I get into the official kind of review and breakdown of this anime, let me give you a little bit of background. So, Orb takes place in a realistic setting, in the 15th century in Poland. Now, at this time, what can only be described as oppressive Christianity is the ruling regime. Heresy is the ultimate sin, and even so much as thoughts against the church can lead you to be executed. This story represents a lot of themes. We have themes of passing the torch, inspiration, human creativity, religious oppression, astronomy, and feminism, just to name a few. Now, this story is heavily inspired by a play written by Bertolt Brecht called The Life of Galileo. Now, The Life of Galileo was a play written in the late 30s and early 40s in response to Nazi science and manipulation of truth and censorship, which, as you'll see, is a huge plot point throughout this anime as well, this kind of censorship of truth. So our story starts with a 12-year-old protagonist, which, for an anime about astronomy and very complex kind of cosmological themes, you'd think this is a bit of a strange take, right? But, just hear it out, okay? This is going somewhere. So our protagonist, Rafal, is a very intelligent boy, right? In this world, theology is considered the highest level of education, and Rafal knows this. He's very intelligent to the point of being able to manipulate the system around him to suit his own needs. He is going to university, or wants to go to university, to study theology. That's the rational thing to do. And rationality and common sense are cornerstones of Rafal's character. They're things that he values above all else, and we see his inner monologue, and he tells us this himself, that the world is easy and can be played as long as you know the words to use and the actions to take. But Rafal is conflicted. You see, he has a passion for astronomy, stargazing, anything to do with the sky and the cosmos. But, if he's going to university to study theology, he would need to sacrifice these hobbies and dedicate his time solely to his university education. While that would be the rational thing to do, it's not an easy sacrifice to make. Rafal's path crosses with a heretic called Hubert. Hubert was prosecuted by the church for studying heliocentrism, which, if you don't know, heliocentrism is the belief that in our galaxy the sun is the centre of gravity and all planets revolve around it. Now, this wasn't the accepted belief at this time. The accepted belief at this time was geocentrism, which is the belief that Earth is the centre of our galaxy and all planets revolve around us. So Rafal's path crosses with Hubert, and despite knowing that it's extremely dangerous to be engaging with this man, again, as I said, any thoughts of heresy and research like this could lead to death, burning at the stake, hanging, all kinds of gruesome, ridiculous tortures just from studying heliocentrism. And as we know, Rafal is a very rational character. By all means, he shouldn't engage with Hubert, but he does. You see, Rafal is very passionate about the cosmos and ultimately reaching some kind of truth and greater meaning, so he learns from Hubert. He studies all about heliocentrism and eventually becomes very entwined with this theory and to the point of almost being obsessed with it. But the church isn't so easy to fool. Eventually, Rafal's passions do catch up to him and he is caught for studying heliocentrism. Now, since it is his first offence, he's not going to be executed. He's going to be taken before a court and he will have a chance to confess his wrongdoing and accept the church was right all along and basically just disregard anything to do with heliocentrism. So they take him away and they take him before court and they say, look, you've got a bright future, you can go to university, all you need to do is say that you were wrong and that the church is correct. It would be the rational thing to do, to just stand up and lie, to say, sure, I was wrong, I'll never research this again. But human beings aren't governed by logic or probability. Human beings are propelled forward by something deeper, our passions, our desires, our inspirations. So despite knowing that it's going to get him in a lot of trouble that he can't come back from, Rafal tears up his university degree and proclaims to the entire court that he believes in heliocentrism. This action leads to Rafal's death, not because it's logical, but because it's something that he's passionate about and that he believes is worth dying for. But before passing away, Rafal says your enemy is a resilient one, essentially meaning that the church, despite trying to stamp out this idea of heliocentrism, as long as human beings continue to live, creativity and inspiration and desire will still exist, and no matter how hard they may try, the church will never be able to stomp that out. After this, we get a little bit of a time skip. 10 years go by and 2 more people stumble upon the heliocentric research materials that Rafal and Hubert buried under a constellation. Our new protagonist is Oxy, and Oxy is somebody who's not a scholar, he's not very smart, he's timid and won't even look at the sky because he is scared of what he'll see. He's scared that he will develop a passion for it. And the reason Oxy is scared is because Oxy is obsessed with going to heaven. He does everything the church says, he keeps his head down, he never steps out of line, and he never wonders. That is until he meets Bedeni, the kind of protagonist for this point in the story. These two are polar opposites. Bedeni is obsessed with knowledge, curiosity, and getting smarter and knowing about the world he's living in, to the point where he even sacrifices his eyesight just to glimpse at some forbidden knowledge. Thankfully, he didn't lose his eyesight completely, but as punishment, the church did pour candle wax into his eye sockets. Yeah, sorry, that's disgusting, I know, but harsh times, I guess. So Oxy and Bedeni continue to develop the heliocentrism theory from where Rafal left off. They're at a point where they're getting quite close to proving it, but unfortunately, given the nature of the research, the church is hot on their tail at every step, and eventually they do catch up. Now, I've been very brief in covering this part of the story, and I mean very, very brief. We're going to come back to some of the characters that really develop throughout this later on, but all you need to know is that this is quite a lengthy part of the story, and through it, Oxy does develop quite significantly. He goes from being timid and cowardly about divine punishment and burning in hell to eternity to feeling the inspiration and passion that Rafal and Bedeni have poured into this theory, and eventually even giving his well-being, his place in heaven, so to speak, for this research. So during this time, Oxy has been keeping a diary, not really a scholarly article of sorts, but more so just a recounting of events through his point of view. Now, Bedeni is a very prideful man and has no intention of passing his research to the next person. He says, if he can't be the one to finish the research, then the research isn't going to be finished at all. At least that's how he starts this part of the story. He eventually gets to a point where he is willing to pass the torch to someone else, though, again, he is quite prideful. He does insist on it not being his research. He takes Oxy's book, his writings, and passes it on to the next participant. And unfortunately, Oxy and Bedeni are captured by the Inquisitors and executed for their part in this theory. And there's something very beautiful about this. In Oxy's final moments, he finally accepts his passion, he finally accepts his inspiration. He goes from being completely terrified of looking up at the sky, completely terrified of any kind of heresy, be it on purpose or accidental, to that very heresy being the only thing that he takes pride in and giving him great comfort when he enters the afterlife. There's quite a significant time skip after the death of these two. 25 years pass until we get a new protagonist, and our new protagonist is a girl named Draa. Draa is somebody who's very conflicted on what she wants to do in life. She's very young, part of a nomad group, kind of travelling around with no real purpose, and she's very mournful of the sunrise because it reminds her of when her father passed away. So she's going about life, not really sure what to do, not really sure what her purpose is, but this all changes when she comes into contact with a group called the Heretic Liberation Front. Now, the Heretic Liberation Front are a group that, as you might have guessed by the name, stand primarily against the Church. The primary goal of this group is to hunt down and publish Oxy's writings on the helocentrism theory. Now, they want to do this because the leader of the group, Yolenta, had previously met Oxy and Bedeni when she was a girl and helped them develop this theory, and now, in her later life, she's dedicating her life to publishing it for the people that come after. Yolenta is a very complex character, and she's actually the reason we have themes of feminism and themes of kind of like parental oppression in this story. And I don't really want to go too deeply into those themes in this video. I really want to try and limit this just to inspiration. If I went over every aspect of the show, we would genuinely be here for years. So yes, for the purpose of this video, all we need to know is that Yolenta is tied to the helocentrism theory and she runs a group dedicated to publishing it. And they do get very close to publishing it. They do manage to hunt down Oxy's writings, albeit after Draa kind of burns them. But, thankfully, Draa also comes in clutch and has the best memory in the entire world, as she memorised the entire novel and perfectly recounts it later in the story. So, you know, go her, I guess. But unfortunately, times haven't really changed too much, and even 25 years later, the Church is still extremely oppressive, albeit their grip on the people has loosened, though not enough for the helocentrism theory to go unnoticed. So unfortunately for our protagonists, there is a traitor amidst the Heretic Liberation Front who ultimately tattles on the group and their heretical findings and informs the Church of their location, thus resulting in one kind of final all-out brawl. Yolenta ends up martyring herself for the cause. The soldiers fight on the front lines and die, and Draa flees, hoping to publish the writings on her own, seeing as she is the only one who has memory of them. Unfortunately, however, she is caught up by one of the Inquisitors and, is attacked, ultimately succumbs to her wounds and, dies. It is quite poetic though. Draa's character does have quite a remarkable arc in just a few episodes. She goes from someone with no real purpose in life to finding solace in the Heretic Liberation Front and developing this kind of noble determination towards convictions. Her convictions ultimately lead her to become a stronger, more independent character where she can finally be free of kind of the fear and guilt of her past. She manages to rid herself of her fear of the sunrise and her mournfulness surrounding its events, and in her final moments, she gazes off at the sun and she takes great comfort in what she sees. At this point in the story, I was thoroughly devastated and pleasantly confused as well. There was still a handful of episodes left, but all leads connecting to the helocentrism theory had been stomped out. Draa, the only one who had memory of this, had died. And all the evidence had been discarded too. So now, an undisclosed amount of time passes and we settle with a new protagonist, someone named Albert, someone who's very generic looking, no offence, but he's no Bedeni, is he? Anyway, Albert is extremely intelligent, but he has had his curiosity thoroughly quenched. He believes that knowledge is this curse that will only lead to bad things and will only make your life short and miserable. This is because he had a really rough past. His father hired a tutor to help him with his extremely bright academic future. However, his tutor, who looks like Rafal but isn't, by the way, this is a completely different character, just under the same name. It's confusing, I know, but just roll with the punches. By the way, I've been back and forth on what this second Rafal actually represents in the story, and my theory is that he represents the double-edged sword of what curiosity and inspiration actually can do to a person. A lot of the time, curiosity and inspiration will lead you to a greater end, some kind of fulfillment and greater meaning, but if you're not careful, it can overtake you, cloud your judgment, skew your morals, and as we see with this second Rafal, it can cause you to do some pretty unforgivable things. But I have no idea if that's correct. That's just my way of making sense of this part of the story. Anyway, his tutor, who looks suspiciously like Rafal, ends up killing his father in pursuit of forbidden knowledge, which was allegedly hidden in the house. So, you know, Albert's curiosity is understandably kinda burnt out. However, after going to a confessional and talking with a priest, he does eventually, well, not reignite the flames of his curiosity, but he does learn that it's okay to have ambitions, that it's okay to want to educate yourself and move forward. So the final scene is he's walking down the street and he's passing by this house, and there's a couple of men outside on the street having a conversation. So one of the men is a delivery guy, and he's essentially saying, look, I've got a letter here registered to this address that says, in the event that this book is published, 10% of the profits should go to someone named Patoki. And the other guy, he even says, look, nobody by that name lives at this address, or has for a very long time. It's gotta be some kind of previous owner or something, or maybe you're even just in the wrong place. Anyway, the name of the book is mentioned and Albert happens to overhear. The book is called On the Movements of the Earth. Fitting, right? Anyway, Albert kind of disregards this at first because that's not the accepted church theory. Remember, they believe in geocentrism, that the Earth is completely stationary and everything else revolves around it. But, for the first time since he was a very young boy, Albert stops, he puts his finger to his chin, he looks up, and he wonders. And that's where the anime ends. Oh god, it is so good. Let me explain a little bit further because I understand that came out of left field. Basically, Patoki was someone who was introduced very early in the anime. He was actually Rafal's foster father. The letter saying that Patoki should receive 10% of the profits was originally Rafal's letter when he intended to finish the heliocentrism theory. And even though Rafal is long dead, Patoki is long dead, Bedeni, Oxy, Yolenta, everybody is long dead, that letter lives on, a proof of the inspiration, the creativity, and the dedication these people had to this research. This letter is a bit of a meme in the community. Sometimes you'll see it in comments like, I love this anime with 90% of my heart, the other 10% goes to Patoki. But I genuinely think this letter is the most important part of this show, at least when conveying some of the main themes. The fact that the letter, when nobody else did, made it to the very end of the story is proof that inspiration will outlive us all. Now, nothing shows this better than the openings. Oh my god, how can I talk about this show without mentioning the openings? This anime is one of the only ones, other than JoJo, that has variations in its opening. This anime only has one opening track, yet 4 different animated versions, one for each of the protagonists. For the first 3 openings, there were flashes of all the people who were involved with the research and heliocentrism in general. However, after Draa, which kind of concluded the original storyline, if you will, those flashes are completely empty. The people that we've lost along the way are now entirely forgotten. No one remembers their names, no one remembers their sacrifices, yet somehow their work lives on. You see it in the final shot of the opening. In the first 3 openings, Rafal closes his hand around the necklace, and in the last opening, Albert opens his hand and the necklace appears in his, Again, going back to that theme of kind of passing the torch from one to another. Absolute cinema. I love this show. What can I say? I'm a total simp for good writing.